I'm gonna hit record.
How many of you have ever photographed a bird? Okay, a lot of you. How many of you have been to San Jacinto Wildlife Area? It's down by Hemet, about 30, 40 minutes from here. So we were talking to the program committee about doing a program about the SJWA, we call it. And I thought, you know, they have a Facebook group site for people who are interested in birding at the San Jacinto Wildlife Area. And I met the guy that started it when I was over at Yucaipa Regional Park, and I joined it right away, but I kept seeing pictures by a guy named Mel Moncrief, and they were really good pictures. In fact, you know how they label him the top contributor now, because he's the guy who really puts a lot of stuff on there. So we contacted him. He agreed to come tonight. He lives in Running Springs, brought his wife Norma and a friend Lee from up on the mountain. He likes to shoot birds and wildlife, and likes to go to places like Asia and Central America and Africa. His favorite place in the world is Tanzania. It's a great place to shoot animals. But locally, his favorite place to go is San Jacinto Wildlife Area. He goes to Yucaipa and Prado and Irvine as well. But he's here with us tonight. Many of you don't know him, but is there anybody here who remembers him? Because he was part of the club in the 1990s. And you know, Frank Peel and a lot of other people, probably some of you helped him learn the craft. And he's back with us tonight. So let's give him a big welcome. Thanks for coming.
No, you go ahead and start. I just need to share our screen. Good.
Well, thanks for inviting me, guys. It's really nice to be back here and to see some familiar faces. I remember Judith and of course Cheryl. And another mutual friend, Mike LeBlanc, took me out when my dad gave me a camera maybe 30 years ago, and it was a pretty nice camera at the time. It was a Pentax with autofocus, and nobody else had that. And so I thought, well, I really owe it to my father to learn how to use this nice gift that he gave me. And I had a friend who was in the Redlands Camera Club, and she invited me, and so I started coming, and that's where I really got my start in photography. And I know if it's anything like it was when I was here before, there's a lot of good shooters here in the audience. And so I struggled with, you know, what to present and what would be the most interesting, but hopefully you guys will learn something. But I hope that I can learn something from you all too. I would like to encourage any questions and participation while I go through this. I thought I would start out with a slideshow and just real quickly here and see if I can get this to work.
And then your mouse up here, we should be able to minimize that.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, that'll be better. All right, let's see if this works. And some of these pictures are from San Jacinto, and for San Jacinto. San Jacinto. Costa Rica. San Jacinto. Arizona. Tanzania. Arizona. Washington. San Jacinto. Ontario. Costa Rica. Costa Rica. A house in Running Springs. Running Springs. San Jacinto. Prado and Chino. Wekiva. San Borrego. Yellowstone. Running Springs. San Jacinto. Costa Rica. Trinidad, Tobago. Tanzania. Washington. Anyway, I'm getting some duplicates there. So. Start with my. Okay, that'll be better.
And then let's see if we can get rid of that. Hit the little minus, the three dots. Video.
Oops.
Next one.
Okay, well,
Show hide. Heading. Yeah, try that.
okay. Now let me see. Okay, here we go. It doesn't want to.
Click on the triangle. Not the word play, but the triangle.
I'm not seeing a triangle. Let me.
Oh, that's because that black thing is in the
Oops.
way.
Okay, yeah, I'm not seeing a triangle.
Click on the OK. Rest, click on the word OK,
Okay. Right up there.
Got that?
and then click on the triangle on the word play,
Okay. Here we go.
and then get rid of, click on the little three dots, and then hide the,
Here, if I can see some over here.
there we go.
Okay.
Now we want to get rid of that. We're close. There you go.
Here we go. So the title of my presentation is Bird Photography, the Joy and the Challenges. And I saw that a lot of people had already taken pictures of birds in the group, and so I know that that you're aware of the challenges. They're small, they're fast. They can be very frustrating, and I was frustrated a lot. These three owls here, there was a place where you could shoot burrowing owls over by the Ontario airport in a vacant lot, and it was just one of the most happening places around for action. But they relocated them, and they don't let you go there anymore, so you got to go down to Salton Sea to find them. But they're the cutest little owls. anyway, I love all nature. My parents raised me to be, we went camping and I fell in love with nature from an early age. And when I first joined the Redlands Camera Club, it was in the mid-90s. I was interested in landscape photography, and and I went out to Joshua Tree with Cheryl and Mike and got into that. And then I learned how to scuba dive, and my wife and I got scuba certified in 2007, and that just took over my photography. It's so exciting being underwater, and the best thing about it is you don't have to hunt for subjects. There's fish and all kinds of stuff all around on every dive, and so I really loved underwater photography. I did that almost exclusively for 10 years or so. And then COVID came along and shut everything down. And about the same time, I had a nephew who graduated from LSU with his PhD in ornithology. And so he was trying to get me into birds, and there was no diving, no travel. And so about that time, Sony came out with a camera. I had shot Canon up until then, but Sony came out with a 200 to 600 millimeter lens, and that was enough to make me jump ship. I'd been waiting for Canon to come out with a new camera for quite a while, and they just hadn't done it. And so I went over to Sony and got that 600 millimeter lens, and that really got me interested in birds, and going down to San Jacinto and to some of the other parks around here. But any kind of, I still like to dive and shoot underwater. Any kind of wildlife or nature, that's where I want to be. And so today I want to talk about the kind of equipment that you would need to shoot birds, some of the camera settings. I don't want to go into that too much because I feel like a lot of people will already know as much or more about camera settings than what I know. But composition, I have some different pictures, and I want to talk a little bit about how I approach the subject in the field and the different types of shots that I want to get. Some field techniques. I'll talk about some of this gear that I have on here, and some of the locations. And then I thought at the end I would just edit one photograph just to show you what I do to edit my photographs. There's some new features in the Adobe Photoshop that are really powerful that can help with editing. This was a trip that I did to Bosque del Apache in New Mexico last December. Okay, well, one thing I want to clarify pretty early is that I'm not a birder. I'm a bird photographer. And there's a big difference as far as I'm concerned. A birder will reach for their binoculars first, whereas I'm going to reach for my camera. A birder's happy just to see or hear a bird. They'll count a bird if they just hear its sound. I'm not happy with that. I want a picture of the bird. I want a good picture. Birders are more interested in rare birds than they are in photogenic birds. This little bird down here at the left is called a gray-collared Bacard, and I went out to Texas, and there were people from all over the United States hunting for this little bird. And when I finally found it, I thought, what's the big deal? I'm much more interested in this rosette spoonbill here. Birders often have very rigid ethical standards, and I believe in in not harming nature, but I don't believe that if you cause a bird to alter its flight that it upsets the balance of nature. So I think animals are maybe a little bit more resilient. Birders love to correct you if you misidentify a bird. I've posted on Facebook before, oh no, that's not this is that, and I don't mind being corrected at all. In fact, if I say anything wrong here, please raise your hand, because there's no need to have incorrect information. But I want to have beautiful pictures of birds that are artistic, that will make people love birds. And I've really never fully understood, why would you go out looking for birds without a camera in your hand? I just don't get that. It's like going out and looking for ladies with no money in your wallet. You might find them, but then what are you gonna do? So I like to have a camera when I go out and look for birds. I would say that you need a 400 millimeter lens or more to photograph birds. If you're in your backyard and you have feeders and stuff set up, you could get by with a little bit less power, but I think you need a 400. And the most important thing to me is a camera with good autofocus. If a bird's sitting in a perch, you don't necessarily need it, but as soon as they take off, if your camera can't track them, you're not going to get nice pictures of birds in flight. So you know, it used to be that everybody carried a tripod and used them all the time for any kind of photography. I almost never use a tripod anymore. It seems like by the time I get my tripod set up, the birds are gone, and I will carry a monopod sometimes. It's nice to have a 600 millimeter lens, and I finally broke down and bought one. And I carry it on this cotton carrier, and it snaps in like this, and so, yeah, let me get here. So I carry it in a cotton carrier like this, and it can't fall out. It has to turn sideways to come out, but it's right there when I need it, and it distributes the weight pretty nicely on my shoulders. And when you have this kind of a lens, then you know you're set up for any kind of birds that come by, and you're much more likely to get the shot, you know, with good autofocus and a good lens.
What's the f-stop on that lens?
It's f4, but I have a 1.4 tele on it. I leave it on most of the time. I leave the tele on if I'm out photographing smaller birds, and then I'll take it off if I'm shooting an egret or something like that. But that, and I'm shooting it with the Sony A1. It's a 50 megapixel camera. So even in crop sensor mode, I've got 22 megapixels, and so I've got plenty of information. Even when I use crop sensor mode. But with crop sensor mode, with the 600 millimeter lens and the 1.4 teleconverter, it's a focal length of 1260, and that's enough to even get small birds. Any more power than that, you're going to be so far away that you're going to start getting heat distortion and that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's really nice to have a rapid frame rate, so that when the bird takes off, you know, you can shoot 20 or 30 frames a second and get the wing position just right. And I'll show some examples of that. And I do use a monopod if there's a situation where I'm going to be focusing in on a bird nest or something like that, where I'm going to be waiting for the parents to come and feed the birds and that kind of stuff. And you know, it gets kind of tiring holding the big lens over a period of time. I use auto ISO, and some of the YouTubers, I learned a lot from watching YouTubes, and there's a lot of free YouTubes, but it's like the speaker said earlier, some of the guys don't have English as a first language, and some guys seem to really like to hear themselves talk, so I found a few guys that I really like. I like Steve Perry a lot. I like a guy, it looks like Jan, but it's Jan Wagener from Australia. Those are some really good bird photographers that just get right into the, you know, beautiful pictures and what you need to know. I would say that 1/3200th of a second is a good shutter speed for most birds in flight. My starting shutter speed is 1/2500th of a second. That's what, when I'm out in the field looking for birds, I shoot at 1/2500th of a second. That way, if the bird suddenly takes off, I've got enough shutter speed to get a decent picture. But if I'm shooting a perched bird, especially if the light is not good, then I'll start going down on my shutter speed. It's almost like we used to bracket, you know, for exposure. I'll bracket for shutter speed, and that way I can bring my ISO down. I have my ISO capped at 12,800, because any more than that, the picture's just not usable, even with topaz. So I'll just start lowering my shutter speed if I've got a perched bird, and then you want to shoot wide open for single birds, but if you're shooting a flock, you got to go to f8 or f11. These are some sandhill cranes that were flying down in Salton Sea area, and there was a big long string of them, so I had a chance to try different exposures as they flew past the moon, and I shot this at f10, and the ISO was 12,800, but I was able to cut the noise down with topaz and still get a fairly decent picture. So it's good to be able to stop down your aperture a little bit if you're shooting multiple birds to get them all in focus. Now here is a bird that I shot at my house, and this shot was actually at 1/3200th of a second. So you can see just a little bit of motion blur in the tip of the wings of the jay. And of course, when a bird's flying directly at you, that's when you need more shutter speed than ever. But I think a little bit of blur on the wings, you know, I don't mind it. I think it gives you a little sense of motion. And but I have a little wooden bowl in my front yard, and I'll put peanuts there. The jays just come in, and it's like an aerial dogfight sometimes. And I'll sit out there and shoot, you know, several hundred shots and keep 2 or 3 of them. And this is one that I liked. So when I think about shooting birds in the field, I want to get a portrait of the bird first. I use this PI as an acronym: portrait, interaction, and environment. And so the first picture is just a simple portrait of a lesser goldfinch. And then I have interaction. These eagles live near Yucaipa Regional Park, and they're pretty active, starting right about now. That they'll be coming in. They start stalking the lake. I think the first time they're going to stalk it is November 21. And once they start stalking the lake, the eagles know that truck and that trailer that come in, and they sit in the trees right by where they're going to release the fish. So that's a good time to find them. And the best thing about that is that when they stalk the lake on those days, they don't allow fishermen. So there's fewer people to scare the eagles. So I really like to go to Yucaipa when I want to look for eagles. And then you once you've gotten your portrait, if you have a chance to get any interaction or behavior, you want to try to do that. And then try to zoom back out or try to capture more of the environment. And a lot of times I still use my 200 to 600, even though I have the big 600 f4, because I like to be able to zoom back and show the environment that the animal lives in if he sticks around long enough for me to have that opportunity. So here's an example of a bee eater that I shot in Africa. And he's got a bee. And so it's a good example of the behavior of the animal. When I first shot this, I cropped it pretty tight, but then I thought, you know, I like that little crook in the branch, so I loosened up the crop a little bit just to include that, and I think it kind of balances out the picture a little bit more, maybe. But these are tiny birds. They're you know, 4 or 5 inches long, but they're so beautifully colored. The pelicans, the white pelicans will show up at Prado, and they'll show up at Yucaipa, and they're right there when the lake gets stocked. At Prado, they actually when they pour the fish into the lake, they have a starter pistol. They fire it to try to scare away the pelicans, but the pelicans have got kind of wise, and they're right there waiting. And every now and then they'll fly up, and but most of the time they're right there waiting for the fish to come. And then this cormorant was in Yucaipa, and he grabbed this fish, and this fish was actually too big for the cormorant to swallow. He tried 3 or 4 times to get that fish down, and finally he spat it out, and the fish swam away. So even birds, I guess, can have you know, eyes that are bigger than their stomach. This little shrike was at San Jacinto. You'll see them around quite often, but this is the first time I'd ever seen one with a snake. They look like sweet little birds, but they're called the butcher birds, and they will take lizards and impale them on barbed wire or on spines from branches to come back and eat later. And I don't know what this bird was going to do with the snake. When we got too close, he tried to fly off with the snake, but the snake was so big he could barely get off the ground, and he just took it a little ways away. And then this egret caught a poor little field mouse, and it's interesting when you see egrets when they have a certain behavior that you know they're hunting. They kind of stalk, and they cock their neck back, and so whenever I see that, you know, I like to try to get into position, and so that if they come up with something, I can get the picture. And then these grebes, these are Clark's grebes. The Clark's grebes have the black above the eye, and the Western grebes, the black on the head extends down into the eye. Our birder quickly corrected me when I misidentified one of them. But they have both kinds of grebes at Prado, and they carry their little babies around on their backs, and it's really sweet to see when they have babies. And grebes, probably a lot of you know, they have a really interesting mating ritual. If you're a male grebe, it's not easy to find love. You have to be able to walk on water. And so I have an example of that here. When they start doing this head bobbing, that's when they're about to, and face each other, that's when they're about to do their little dance.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Okay, and here's some more pictures of birds. There's a place in Washington State where the tide goes way out. It's on the Hood River Canal, and the tide goes way out, and these herons come in and they catch fish, and then the bald eagles come in to steal the fish from the herons. And so that's another great place to get action. And here this eagle swooping in, and the heron's wisely dropping his fish and taking off. And then this other picture next to it is a merlin, a small falcon at San Jacinto that caught an unfortunate tree swallow, and he's getting ready to have his evening dinner. I like having some humor if I run into it with birds. Just getting the egret, from a low vantage point with his eyes, and then I've got a roadrunner with a bad hair day, and then that ostrich. The ostrich. Actually, I didn't shoot this ostrich in Africa. I shot him at the Living Desert exhibit. Tongues, most people don't realize that birds have tongues, but when you get to see one, it's pretty comical, I think. And then here I have my exhibitionist blue heron, and I think the Burro Alice are laughing at him. Is that all you got? Anyway, so anytime I can find funny pictures, that always makes for an interesting shot. Here's some pictures that show a little bit of the environment. You can, if you get the bird in the right spot, you can show a little bit of environment, just enough to place the bird in his world, and hummingbirds on regular flowers and stuff. So you can shoot tight shots and still show a little bit of the environment to make it more interesting. Does anybody have any questions up to this point? I know there's a lot of knowledge out here in the room, so yes.
So Mel, looking at the blue jays up where you live in Running Springs, do they fly away during the winter, or they just stay there all around?
They're there the whole winter, and they make great subjects. I was and the blue jays around our house have gotten to be pretty tame because we feed them regularly, and so you can set up feeders, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But you can set up feeders in a way that still looks natural. Like I would find a mossy log, a branch lying in the forest, and I would set that on the railing to where it hides the feeder, and the birds will come in and land on the mossy log and get pictures that way. So there's a lot of little things you can do right in your backyard to get nice pictures if you set up your feeders and you think about the background. If you have some hedges or something that are far enough away that you can blur them out and have a nice bokeh, then you can get good pictures right in your backyard.
Mel, that picture of the bee eater, that had a very monochrome background.
It did. That was from the 600 F4. It makes it real easy. But the thing that's new in Photoshop is they have a command called lens blur, and I'm going to demonstrate that. So you don't necessarily have to have a big fast lens anymore to get that look. You can just click the lens blur, and it'll select the subject and blur the background, and it usually does a really good job. Every now and then you'll get some weird artifacts, or it'll blur something that shouldn't be, that's not in the same focal plane that should be blurred, but most of the time it works pretty well. Okay, so here's some more environmental shots. This bird, I even forget the name of this bird on the left here, but he was down in Huntington Park down near Huntington Beach, and then this little common yellowthroat was in a group of flowers, and I got a close-up picture of him, and then I zoomed back because I like the flowers just to show kind of where he lives. And those common yellowthroats, to me, I don't know why they got that name because they're not that common. and they're hard to photograph. They like to live in reeds a lot too, so they do have them at San Jacinto. And they're one of the birds that will respond to calls. So I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. I have a Bluetooth speaker, and so a lot of people know about the Merlin app, but the Merlin app is from Cornell University, and it will identify birds from pictures, but it'll even identify birds from sound. And so you can take your phone out if you have that Merlin app. It's a free app, and when you identify birds using the Merlin app, it goes into their database of where birds are. So you're helping with research, and that's how they support themselves. And more times than not, it'll identify birds accurately. Every now and then, it's not sure. It gives you 2 or 3 choices, and you look at the pictures and you can't quite tell. And sometimes the pictures are really very different species, and you wonder, how certain birds would even be a possibility. But then I have my nephew, the ornithologist, and he's a LSU guy. So I just say, well, the guys from Cornell think this is this, but I want to get an opinion from LSU. And so I'll ask him, and he's always happy to say, well, if you look here at the barred feathers on the rump, and they can describe all the reasons, why it's a certain bird. And every now and then you get portrait, behavior, and environment all together. This ground hornbill was in Africa, where I went this May. And so there were flowers in the background. So it shows his environment on the ground. He's got a little insect in his mouth. And so this is the kind of picture that I value the most. Either this type of picture that shows the bird doing a behavior in his environment, or the peak action type of picture. That's the other picture that I really like. Sometimes the more simple your picture is, the more striking it can be. These are all examples of real simple birds. The hummingbird was I shot in Trinidad, Tobago. I went down there. My nephew, who's an ornithologist, I really wanted to get him into diving. So I told him, if you get scuba certified, I'll take you diving, and we'll go look for birds too. We'll go to some place that has birds, and Trinidad Tobago has both good diving and good birds. And so he went out and got scuba certified, and we went, and it was just such a joy because I got to be diving with him when he saw his first turtle and his first shark and everything. And then he took me into the jungle, and he showed me how to call birds in. And I had a Canon 1-400 millimeter lens, which is really a very good, sharp older lens. And I used that on this trip. But there were so many birds. It was just a great, great experience. And then this western bluebird was just right off my deck in my backyard. Okay, so I mentioned before that you can put up feeders in a natural environment in your backyard, and put branches around them, and so that when the birds come into land, you can get nice pictures. I use the Merlin or the Audubon app. Audubon has another free app, and it's not as good at identifying birds. It doesn't identify them from sound or photos, but it has all the sounds of the birds. It's got a bigger library of sounds. And so once I know what the bird is, I can go to the Audubon app and play the sound, and then the birds will come in to see who's new in the neighborhood, and I can get pictures that way. And that's the kind of thing that some birders will do, and other birders think it's just horrible that you would be disturbing animals that way. And I respect everybody's opinion. There's room for that. So if I'm with serious birders and they, for one thing, you don't want to be playing sounds if they're out hunting for birds and they think that they found a bird and it's your sound. So you don't want to do that. And I get that. But if I'm out there with other photographers, and I can play a sound and get a bird to come in, I don't think it hurts anything. And my nephew, who's an ornithologist, taught me how to do this. And so I think it's pretty safe. And so I use my Bluetooth speaker, and what I'll do is I'll take it and I'll hook it on a tree and walk maybe 30 feet away. And then I'll play the sound of the bird that I'm trying to call in. And it works more times than not. But I have a sound that my that my nephew gave me that will attract lots of birds in various settings. And this sound is called mobbing, and it's from Cornell University. And let me get my speaker turned on here. And what this is an eastern screech owl, and a lot of little birds, when they see an owl, they'll come and scold the owl. And so you can hear the owl screeching, and you can hear all the little birds scolding him. And so when I play this sound, I'll have 20 birds come down into a tree just to see what's up. And it sounds like this. So that's a screech owl, and then all the little birds are there. And it takes about a minute, you know. I'll set it on the tree. Anyway, I certainly could make this audio file available to be posted on the website if anybody's interested on the Redlands Camera Club website. I could just email it and you can use it. Yes, sir.
Yes. Email.
Yeah, but in the mountains in particular, it works really well. A lot of chickadees will come down. They're very curious birds, and juncos and so on. But I've used it at San Jacinto. The vermilion flycatchers and the common yellowthroats will come in sometimes, and even woodpeckers will come to see what's going on. And so it's pretty useful. And every now and then I'll be out and I'll get a flash of some. Anytime I see a yellow bird, that gets my attention. Like I said, I want photogenic birds. I don't necessarily want my bird photography friends talk about LBJ birds, little brown jobs. You know, they may be rare, and it's kind of neat to get a rare bird, but I want a pretty bird, and so if I see a flash of yellow someplace, I'll try to figure out what the bird is and play the sound, and if he comes out, I can get a good picture. Yeah, Bruce?
We got the common yellow-throated bird that you were looking at, that according to Christine Pence is an orange cheek waxbill.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. That rings a bell now. Yeah. Yeah, I went with some other birder friends down to Huntington Beach, and these were birders as opposed to bird photographers. And so they were showing me some rare birds, but those are tiny little guys. They're just barely bigger than hummingbirds. And they're one of these birds that I think is not native to California, but they've escaped and they've established a population. So I use my Bluetooth speaker to track birds. Sometimes I'll use a remote trigger. So I'll set up my camera on a tripod by the bird feeders out on my deck, and then I'll sit inside the house and when the birds come in, I'll fire it from there. And there's all kinds of, most of the cameras have an app where you can see what the camera sees on your computer and fire that way too. But that's a good way to get close-up pictures of birds that are skittish. When you're shooting birds and they're gonna take off and fly, they like to take off into the wind. And of course you want the sun behind you so that the bird's nicely lit. So if you can find a situation where the wind and the sun are both behind you, then you're in a good place to get, especially wading birds. You know, the bigger birds really need the wind to lift off. And I love to see birds wading in the water and get their reflections and all that stuff, but it's even more fun when they take off and you can get them in flight. So I try to position myself that way. Birds are naturally curious. That's one reason why they go to that sound of the owl and all the other birds scolding it. But when you're out with birders, sometimes they do this thing where they go psh, 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 like that, and birds wonder what the heck is that, and they'll come. I've gotten birds to open their eyes. A lot of times, if you find a great horned owl sitting in a tree, his eyes are closed. Playing the great horned owl sound will get them to open their eyes, though. And so I think where you want to be careful is if a bird is sitting on a nest. I won't ever mess with it. You know, I won't use any calls. I won't disturb a bird that's sitting on its nest, because that's where you can cause some harm to nature. And so that's the one place where I'm real careful. But they are curious. But all animals are afraid of the human voice. They've done studies that even, you know, apex predators, when they hear human voice, they're on guard. And so, I would say, when you're trying to call birds in and you're with a friend, I wouldn't talk at all. You'll get more birds to come in. And that's probably, true when you go on your San Jacinto. I may be able to go on that San Jacinto, trip. I'm not sure what my schedule is, but if I can, I'd like to join you guys, and, I know the park pretty well. But the other thing is you want to get low, eye level or down low. If you're shooting birds that are on the water in particular, if you can get your camera right down on the ground, that's good. But it's harder and harder for me to kneel down and stuff. So that's the other little thing I have here is a little knee pad. And so what I'll do is I'll put the knee pad down, and then I take my LCD and get down like this, and I won't do it right now because there's nothing good enough to make me do that. But if there's good action, I'll kneel down and then hold my camera right down on the ground and try to find it in the LCD on the back. And that does a couple of things. It's much more engaging when you're at eye level with any subject, but it also allows you to have a nice clean background. When you're down low at the eye level of the bird. Okay, here's some more pictures of birds from my yard. Now, I told you that I had the little branch with the moss on it to hide my feeders and make it more natural. Well, the moss on my branch died, and so I wanted to shoot the birds again, and I didn't have a branch, so I just used a little Photoshop AI and hid the rail and and this is not something that I do very often. And if I ever do use AI, I acknowledge it because I think it's deceptive. I mean, when you think about AI already is getting pretty good. I can usually tell if a photograph's AI, but it's going to be not long at all until you won't be able to tell the difference. And as photographers, that's kind of threatening, that anybody can just design a picture and stuff. So I think it's important to acknowledge if you use AI. And I use it, when I use it, most of the time it's to remove something, from a photograph. If there's a telephone wire or something like that, then I'll use it to remove distracting elements. But I don't use it to add stuff. I just did this for the fun of it, just to show, what the possibilities are. Peak action, that's the other thing that I really like. And that's where you want to have a fast frame rate and have a bunch of pictures to choose from. But this owl was at Morongo. That's another great place to photograph. And he landed in a tree, and the nest was about 10 feet below it. And there were owlets in the nest. And so I knew that he was going to fly from his perch down to the nest to join the owlets. And so I quickly maneuvered myself to where the light would be shining, and focused right above the nest. And sure enough, he came right down, and I got, a series of 10 or 15 shots. And that was the one that I liked the best. What I like is the implied action where the claws are not quite touching. I kind of got this idea from, there's a real famous picture that Thomas Mangelson did where the grizzly bear and the salmon's right there, but the bear hasn't quite latched down on him. And I thought that's what makes the picture, is that it hasn't quite happened, but it's going to happen. And so this owl might be an example of that. Orioles love grape jelly. And so if you want to attract orioles, you can put out grape jelly. But what I do is I try to find branches. I have some fruit trees in my yard. And so I got some little plastic Tupperware things and just zip tied them to the branches down below. And the orioles would land up in the tree, and then they'd come down to the jam, but I could get them in the trees. And then one of my buddies did this with the other orioles on the left. And set up a blind in his backyard. He got one of those new A9 threes that can shoot 120 frames a second, and it has the pre-capture mode. And so I got this picture using his lens. What that means is that you can press down your shutter button, and but not all the way, and it starts writing the images to the buffer of the camera. but it doesn't write them to your memory card. But then as soon as the bird takes off, your reaction is not going to be fast enough. The bird will be clear out of the frame, but it's already writing pictures to the buffer. So when you push down, then all those pictures get saved to your memory card, and so you can get birds taking off that way. I thought it would be a game changer, but it's still pretty hard for a camera to adjust that quickly to autofocus, and so I got some good pictures using that, but not enough to flunk down, $6,000 for the camera or whatever it was. I'm still waiting for the next version of the A1 to come out. It's really useful to have 50 megapixels instead of 24 megapixels for birds, because more times than not, the bird's going to be small in the frame, but if you have a big megapixel camera, then you can still crop down and get good images. Okay, and here's some more peak action, snowy egret taking off. And then these were the owls that were at Ontario. And people took some branches and set up perches for the owls. And some of the birders were saying, this is so fake, you shouldn't be doing this. Well, what does it hurt? You set up a perch for a bird, and then you get better pictures. And so this is the same branch where there were 3 owls sitting, and one of the owlets had the higher perch and the other one wanted it, so he flew up and landed right on his head, and I got the whole sequence. But this one where the talons are just a half an inch from the head, I think turned out to be the best one because of that implied action. And then these are some of the jays battling over peanuts in my yard. My camera shoots 30 frames a second, so you can see, even at 30 frames a second, every picture is a little bit different, and you can go through and get the whole sequence or pick out the one that you like the best. And it does mean that you spend a lot of time sorting through a lot of pictures, though. Okay, and here, this is another eagle from my trip to Washington, and he's just about to grab a fish, and that was one of the pictures that every photographer wants to get a picture of an eagle grabbing a fish. And I got the whole sequence, including the eagle grabbing the fish, but I like this one better. I like the position of him and just the implied action that's gonna come when he grabs that fish. Eagles represent a real unique challenge, bald eagles, because there's so much contrast between their head and their body, and the camera's gonna set the exposure based on the majority of what's in the picture. And so when you shoot bald eagles, you have to underexpose by at least one stop to not blow out the white feathers on their heads. But then if they're in bright sunlight, the wings are dark, and if you try to raise the exposure too much, then you start getting noise and stuff. So they're a challenge. It's always better to shoot them, early in the morning or on a foggy day, then you can get all the detail and not run out of dynamic range. But these are the 2 bald eagles that live in Yucaipa Regional Park, and they don't actually have their nest in the park. I hunted and hunted, and I thought that there's no way that a bald eagle would have a nest that close to people. The nest that's up in Big Bear that a lot of people know about is way up on a hill away from everybody, and they close the whole area so that the eagles won't get scared away. So these eagles actually have a nest up in a canyon, maybe a few miles from the park. I'm not sure quite where the nest is, but I've watched them come and go. But they come down to the park to hunt, and especially when they're stalking the lake. And so that's the best place. In Big Bear, when you try to find those eagles, there's so many places. It's such a big lake, but Yucaipa is much smaller. It's much easier to find them. You just kind of go along and look for a little white golf ball in the tree, and that's that's what they look like. And here's one of them flying by, and like I said, underexposing by one stop to not blow out the highlights of their white heads. Okay, so some of the locations that I like to go to. I like to go to Yucaipa Regional Park, like I mentioned, San Jacinto Wildlife Area. This tree was from San Jacinto. This is the last pond that they fill. They kind of fill the ponds in a certain order. And so this pond, I was there just last week, and this pond wasn't full yet. But there's a lot of other ponds that are. And I mentioned Morongo Preserve, Irvine Regional Park has some good animals. Right now, they've got mandarin ducks there, and mandarin ducks are definitely one of my favorites. And wood ducks, they're just gorgeous birds, and they're there now. Bolsa Chica Wetlands, San Joaquin Wetlands, Huntington Beach, these are all places. But because you guys have the field trip, I thought I'd really focus on San Jacinto more. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, when you mentioned the eagles and Big Bear, it reminded me of this news article that kept coming up in the Sun about these two eagles named Jackie and something. Yeah, and Shadow.
Yeah.
Have you ever shot them?
I have, and I haven't shot them enough to know which one's which. If you see them together, the male's always smaller. And so you can tell when you see them together, which one's which. The Ukaipa ones, they call them Sierra and Coyote, and just one of my friends named them. I mean, yeah, I've seen those eagles. Well, I know where the nest is, and there's a place, there's a lookout where you can see the nest from a long distance away. And so I set up my camera with my 600mm lens and a 2x converter, and then Sony has this thing where they where they do a digital crop and enhance it in the camera, and so I did all those tricks, and you can see eagles in the nest, but they're not photographs that it's too far away to be a publishable photograph. But and I've seen them in the trees around, but they're much harder to find. And the sad thing is that for some reason, there's been several years where they haven't, the eggs didn't hatch. I'm not sure what the story is there. Someone's not doing a full and complete job, I think. Someone needs to probably talk to Shadow about that. But anyway, so getting into San Jacinto, it's got 4 nice seasons to it. The first one is spring, and the ponds are just wildflowers all over, and it's just beautiful. And then in the summer, everything kind of dries up. And there's not a lot of bird action in the summer. In the winter, when the ponds are full, then all the ducks and the wading birds come in, and so then the raptors come in to hunt them, and so the winter is the best. But even in the summer, there's a lot of local birds that will stay there, smaller birds, and there's coyotes and skunks and raccoons, and there's stuff to shoot even in the summer, but it's kind of hot and there's less action, so I tend to like to go in the winter more. The trees don't start losing their leaves until January usually, so fall comes later in San Jacinto. Probably it's just lower elevation and doesn't get cold enough for the leaves to turn. But here you can see fall with snow on the mountains, and so there's beautiful landscapes to be shot there for sure. And then the ponds with all the snow in the winter. And so you can go to the San Jacinto wildlife area. Now there's people that say that you need to buy a land pass to go there, and it's fairly inexpensive. But I tried to find it on the website, and I couldn't find it. And I can tell you that I've never been asked for a pass. If I knew where to get one, I would buy one, and I meant to really nail that down before I came here to give this talk. But they don't sell the pass there. They don't ask for it. I've never been asked. I've been there hundreds of times. I've talked to workers. I know the guy who runs the place, and I've never been asked for one. But I think if you're going to do a field trip, it might be. Have you checked out the land pass thing at all, or?
Yeah, I think Russ, you were saying if you have a fishing license.
If you have a fishing license or a hunting license, that can get you in. And the fact if we're carpooling to go down there, as one person I have a fishing license, and you put 3 people in the car, and hey, you're all good to go. You're legally in there. So
I've been birding there for 40 years and I never did it.
well, they never asked
They
me
have a
either.
kiosk that says permits and I never stopped that. I just drive on in. I've been going there forever. And I've never been asked.
Another question, or?
Yeah, well, land pass, you can get it from Big Five. I don't know about I don't know about Smart Mart or the other ones, but I know Big Five will sell you that. If you just want a 1 day pass, you can go you can go online and
Well, if you feel like you want to
game
support,
and get a Lands pass, either an annual pass or a daily pass.
well, I'm happy to support, you know, to pay and support, you know, conservation, although San Jacinto Wildlife Area is in fact a hunting area, and the hunting season just started. So they have hunting on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So you don't want to go on those days. In fact, you're not even allowed in. There's areas along the side where you can go. Yeah, Wayne?
Yeah, another thing, when you're going in, there's this little sign that you might miss that tells what time they close. And if you don't get out in time, they lock the door and call the sheriff. I know.
I've never had that. I've never run into the gate lock, even getting there before dawn. It's usually open, and I've left within an hour of sunset, you know, within maybe half an hour of sunset, and haven't been locked in, but that's good to know. Yeah.
Talking to some of my hunter friends, one of the reasons why they do wildlife areas in California is so that people do have a place to go hunt.
Well,
You know, and they allow hunting there, yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that there's days for birding and there's days for hunting, and that there's enough to go around. I don't have a problem with that, and hunting is pretty tightly regulated, so you're not gonna be, you know, wiping out endangered species and stuff, hopefully. And I think if the hunters weren't paying, you know, the money for the privilege of being able to hunt there, they might not even keep the place up. So the hunters do support it. I kind of wish there wasn't hunting, because what you find is that the birds are more skittish there, and particularly after the first day. So I went last week because it was the last day that I could get out there before the hunting season started. And I was able to get closer to birds and stuff. But then once the hunting season starts, everybody's reminded, you know, that they need to fear people. And so it's harder to get close to the birds. And the birds that are the most desirable, the mallards and the pintails and the northern shovelers, those are the ducks that the hunters are after. They're really skittish, whereas the coots, nobody wants them, and they kind of just stay there. But the coots aren't very photogenic unless you get baby coots. Baby coots are just, they have orange feathers and they look like little punkers, you know. But the coots seem to hide their babies. I think that's why there's so many of them. They take better care of their young. The mallard ducks are all out there in the water cruising around where hawks can swoop in and pick them off. And you see so many coots, I think they take better care of their babies. So you don't get to see the babies very often, but when you do, they're pretty cool. But you can go to the San Jacinto Wildlife Area on the web, and you can download a map, and I have a little routine when I get there, depending on what time of day I get there. I kind of have a little path that I go through, and then I like to walk on the far side. I like to park my car and walk. But it's a rich habitat. I mean, here's a bunch of blackbirds taking off, and if you look real carefully in this picture, you can see one or two yellow-headed blackbirds, and those are a real joy to photograph when you see them. They hang out with all the other blackbirds. But there's one kind of toward the top of the image, right in the center. You can see a little yellow head sticking out, and every now and then I'll get those guys off by themselves, and they're very photogenic. The long-billed curlews come in when they first flood the ponds, and then other times you'll just see a whole bunch of egrets. I think when they first flood the ponds, gophers and rodents come up that, you know, their burrows are totally getting flooded, and so the egrets know that, and they're there looking for them. I've seen coyotes, I've seen raccoons there. Not too often with the raccoons, but they're just, I mean, we're all photographers. If you're going out looking for birds and you suddenly find a raccoon, you're not going to be disappointed. You know, at least I'm not. You know, I love shooting mammals, and I've even seen the coyotes doing the pouncing thing that they do. Little baby coyotes. The young coyotes are more prevalent during the summer. You're more likely to see them. Skunks. And then harriers are probably my favorite bird of prey that you see there fairly often. And this is a female harrier. The females are browner, and they've got the cute little necklace that you can see. And when you get there in the golden hour, you know, any picture that you take is just 10 times as good, you know, when you have that golden light. I mean, this picture of an egret, for example, there's nothing special about this picture except for the fact that it's early morning light and the gold on them. I just love that light. I love my sleep too, so it's a challenge for me to get up early and do that, but sometimes I will, and it's worth it when you do. Here's one of the mandarin ducks that I got down at Irvine Regional Park. They're down there right now, probably. I've seen, and that's the other thing. I belong to several Facebook birding groups, like Wayne mentioned earlier. So that's a great place to get leads. You know, you see, as soon as I see some good pictures from someplace, one of my birding friends, and I know, okay, I've got to go get that shot, and I know where to go, and you know, you trade information and stuff. And some people that post are very secretive, and I think in particular, it's probably not good to post pictures of birds in the nest and tell people where nests are, because that's when they're the most vulnerable, and I do get that. But otherwise, you know, I'm happy to share information with other people that I think are responsible and ethical. These are some white-tailed kites that I got 2 weeks ago at San Jacinto. These kites are so gorgeous. I wasn't even aware of kites, you know, 6 years ago. And when I started getting into birding, I saw some pictures. They're just awesome, you know, little hawks that they do a lot of cool things. One of the things that they do is that the male will catch a mouse and then give it to the female in midair. There's this transfer thing that they do. And that's a shot that I did not have yet. That it's one of the shots on my list that I really want to get. But these three kites were all in a tree, and they're pretty skittish too. It's hard to get close to them. But they have a beautiful orange eye, and their eyes are kind of set back in their head, so it's really hard to get the orange eye, but the one in the middle, you can see it a little bit there. These are the long-billed curlews. They're just gorgeous birds when they fly. And kites, the reason I think they call them kites is because they will flutter in one place in the air. And when they do, you have a great chance to lock focus and fire off a bunch of shots, and maybe you'll get one that's perfectly symmetrical like this. So it's really neat to see them when they do that fluttering. The kestrels will do that too. They'll flutter in place. But I was just at San Jacinto last week. I was walking along with my buddy, and I saw this harrier battle. And I've seen pictures like this, but I wanted it so bad, and I finally got it. And this battle happened fast. I mean, you know, I had my camera set. I usually, my camera will shoot 30 frames a second. I usually set it to 20 frames a second because that's about the most, you know, editing that I want to do. And so I had it set to 20 frames a second, and I saw this harrier, and this is where practice comes in, because when you have a 600 millimeter lens and a teleconverter and all that stuff, at 1260, your field of view is 1.64. Whereas your eyes can see 45 degrees. And so 1/40th of what you can see with your eye. So it's pretty hard to acquire the target unless you're really used to, you know, you raise up your lens and sight down it and find it. And that's where the practice comes in. But I saw these birds, and I was able to quickly zoom in, and I got 8 shots of this sequence. And I picked the 3 that I thought were the best. And I fortunately had the wherewithal to go from 5.6 to, I quickly stopped down a little bit to make sure that they would both be in focus, you know, all in a matter of 1/3 of a second, and managed to get these shots that I was really thrilled with.
So Mel, was that auto ISO?
Yeah.
'Cause there's white on those feathers there, you know, they could have gotten blown out.
Yeah. Yeah, I was. The one thing that's really nice about Sony compared to any of the other cameras is they have the little blinkies. The other cameras, you have a histogram, but when you see that your histogram is too far to the right, you don't know which area is blowing out. But with Sony, Sony's the only one that I know of, that actually has little blinkies on the areas that are blowing out. And so as soon as I see that, I could get my finger up and crank down the exposure compensation. Yeah,
Nikon has blinkies too.
You have to set it in your menu.
Yeah,
really?
just have to set it. Yep.
My
Nikon
buddy
does.
Lee's here and he's a Nikon shooter and you're gonna have to figure out how to do that, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, depends on which one you have though. I can't.
Well, he's got the Z8.
Got a Z8.
Yeah, it's on there. Z8 has a D850, D810.
Thank you, Stan.
Wow, okay, well, good to know. I'll tell you right now, Nikon has the best lenses, I think. Nikon's the only one that has the built-in teleconverters, on all their lenses. I almost wish I had, gone the Nikon route, but once Sony comes out with a new camera, I'll probably be happy again. Okay, so these birds here, I did have my Sony camera's been in the shop twice, and so most of my friends have never had problems with theirs, but I had my Sony camera in the shop for 2 months, and I was going crazy, and so I went out and bought this Canon R10 and this 800 millimeter f11 lens. And you think f11, what can you do with that? Well, I got these shots with this camera. And this is light with a crop sensor. This camera with a crop sensor mode gives you 1280 of focal length. And so, and for a very low price. In fact, I'm selling this whole system because I'm just not using it anymore, and I got my camera back and stuff. And so if anybody's interested, I'm selling this whole system real cheap. And in fact, if I go, if I'm able to join you guys for the field trip, I'll bring it, and anybody's interested, you can just try it out and see how it works. But the Sony Canon has the eye detect. It'll detect the eye of a bird, and it just locked on to both of these subjects and gave me nice sharp pictures. It was, good light. Obviously, f11 lens isn't going to be great for golden hour, but it's light and inexpensive, and it's got plenty of power. I would say this would be a really good system to learn on. You don't want to learn with an 800 millimeter lens because it's so hard to find the subject, but I have the 1 to 400 millimeter lens too as part of this kit. And so if you're first learning how to acquire the subject and lock onto it, if you have your lens set to 100, you can quickly find the subject, then you can zoom in and get the shot. So that's kind of how I taught myself at first, and that would be a good way to go. And the 1 to 400 is really light too. Okay, and sometimes, particularly when I was when I'm shooting around my house, sometimes, and when you want to get hummingbirds and you want their gorgets, you want to see all the color and stuff. Sometimes flash really helps bring that out, and it kind of freezes the action. So these are a couple shots that I took back when I was shooting Canon, the Hummer, and then the woodpecker I shot with my Sony with a remote trigger when he was coming in to eat. But you can see kind of some blur on the wings, but the face is sharp, and the flash will do that. And
We've got 10 minutes to 8:30.
oh, okay. Well, I'm just about done. This is my last picture here, and there's just a little bit of motion blur on the wings here, and that's it. So I would say, if you want to get into birds, learn your camera and your settings. You can't take your camera down and be fiddling around. You have to have your custom buttons and everything. And there's great YouTubes that you can watch. Steve Perry has one for almost every camera system out there. And if you got to have an hour to set aside where you watch a little bit and it says set up this button this way, and then you stop the video and you have your camera and you set it up. And I think almost all the bird shooters that I know use the back button focus. So you separate the instead of focusing with your shutter button, you focus with your thumb, and that separates them and allows you to have a lot more control over your autofocus, and you have your custom buttons all set up. Find other people to go out with. It's a lot of fun, you know, you want, and if you can find more experienced people, I had a lot of more experienced people take me out when I was learning. Spending lots of time in the field. I mean, when you're outdoors, even if you don't find a lot of great subjects, you're outdoors, you're walking around. It's good for you. It's good for me. And enjoy, and thanks for your attention.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now, Q&A. I'm sure there's some
Please,
Q's.
yeah.
Here's the A's.
Yes, sir.
Well, I go to San Jacinto quite a lot. And I always think I'm gonna get something when I go there. I'm not very deliberate. Are you deliberate? Do you say to yourself, I know the flycatchers are gonna be at Big Morongo. I'm gonna spend all my time getting the great flycatchers?
No, I'm looking for targets of opportunity. I've been there enough to kind of have a feel for the season. Like, for example, in about 1 month, the tree swallows will come. And they hang out in a certain area, and they're a lot of fun to shoot. You know, the babies there's little holes in the trees. I know right where they are, and the babies will be there with their mouths open, and the parents will come in. And so I know that. I know when the ducks start to show up that the harriers will be there pretty soon. There was one year where there were bald eagles just hanging out there. You drive down the road and there'd be 20 photographers with big glass, you know, waiting for the bald eagles, and that was just great. The last couple of years haven't been really great for bald eagles. I got a golden eagle there last year. But I'm looking for any action and just enjoying being out in nature. Other questions?
You know, it's interesting when you talked about Ukaipa Lake, about when they dump the fish there. Do you have a heads up on when they dump the fish there?
Well, I asked the guys at the gate when I go in. I have a membership to all the San Bernardino County parks. It's, you know, if you get the senior membership, it's like $100 a year. And so I go to Prado and Ukaipa often enough that it pays me to have that membership. And so I'll just ask the guys, hey, when are you guys going to stock the lake next? But they actually have it on the website too. So if you go to their website, it'll, because the fishermen want to know. And
I think it's on Thursdays, and the different lakes are on alternate Thursdays. So
right, yeah. So they'll stock the top lake one day, and then 2 weeks later, it's something like that. Yeah, that sounds right. Yes.
I just wanted to thank you because you're like so enthusiastic, and I was like, I want to come because I'm part of the club and I want to learn new things. And I had met you in the summer, but I was like, birds, whatever. But this is so exciting, and I just loved everything that you said, and I just like the whole idea just to be enthusiastic and see what's out there and your love of nature. So I just thank you for your enthusiasm.
Thank you.
And showing a little bit of like there's enough in there for a beginner like me to like pick up a few little things to get interested.
Are you thinking about going on the field trip?
I can't because I teach that day, but like just to play with them, just for future use, and I just appreciate it. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bruce, can we take a question from Zoom?
Go for it.
Okay, great. Michelle is asking if you sell your photos.
I give them away. Anybody? I post them on Facebook, and if anybody wants one, I'll email it to them. The selling market is so competitive, and there's so many good shooters out there right now. You know, I thought about it when I retired. I thought maybe I should set up a photo business. I could write off all my gear and all that stuff. But I'm retired. I don't want to keep records. You know, I just want to share with what you know. And I've had friends that have, you know, set up websites through SmugMug and all this, and you don't sell very many pictures, and the amount of work that you go through for that, you know, I'd rather just share, you know, whatever I get with people. I do put my little logo on my pictures now just because I think it makes them look more professional, but someone could very easily remove that in Photoshop. Oh, the one other thing I was gonna do is just edit this one picture. Is there enough time? It'll take me 2 or 3 minutes, or?
Go for it.
Okay. So open with Let me just,
Should be coming up with open with Photoshop.
yeah, but I'm not seeing, okay, other,
You find it?
yeah, I think I got it here.
That's why I use my mouse all the
Hey,
time.
while Mel is doing that, I want to let everybody know here that I have a
This is
really
the
nice
engineer.
monopod that I don't need. If you don't use a monopod in bird photography,
Sneaky.
it's nice to have because it takes the weight off.
Okay, I
when you're
see, I see.
Oh, yeah,
I
and
see what
waiting
the
for a
problem
bird to
is.
do something.
Cancel that. There we
My man Dave Fickey gave this to me. It turns out to be not quite tall enough.
go. Why isn't it showing
No,
up?
I
anyone who
can
wants
do it
this,
from here. I know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
it's available
Okay,
tonight.
so open with other, and then it gave me the list.
For the low price of free.
Volunteering for what Bruce wants you to do.
Oh, there he goes.
Okay, so this is a camera raw image that I've opened in Photoshop, and you can see an eagle with a fish. But there's a lot of junk in the background. The eagle is far enough away that he's not filling up the frame as much and stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is to crop this down, and I'm going to crop it to 3x4. And then there's almost no detail in the shadow here. So I'm going to select the subject. And it selects him, and I'm going to raise the shadows up a little bit. And then I'm going to go down here to this lens blur. This is just the greatest feature here. Lens blur, apply. So if we look before and after, somehow my version was doing a little bit more, but you can just blur out the background and get rid of a lot of that stuff. And then from here, if I open it up, Photoshop does not recognize this type of file. Well, anyway, I know how to do it on my camera, but using the lens blur to get rid of the background and then opening it up, and then I just use the remove tool to get rid of some of the annoying branches, just clean the image up a little bit. And you could talk for hours on Photoshop, and I'm sure there's people that know it a lot better than I do, but those are some features that I like to use. Anyway, that is it. I didn't mean to go over, but thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. And that concludes our presentation. So feel free to chit chat. Mel's over here with Q&A, and we'll see you next time on Zoom.
51-315-6015. I'm on Facebook. That's the easiest way for me to keep in touch
How's
with
your
people.
boy?
Mel Moncrief on Facebook. I'm friends with Bruce and Wade, so
Yeah,
you can find me that way.
Oh, I bet he is.
Yeah.
It's so great. Thanks for having me.
Good touch.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed it. Great personality. Really.
Thank you.
Good to talk.
Good to see you.